The worst part wasn't finding out. My business partner had been sleeping with my wife for nearly a year. The worst part was that my own father looked me in the eye, 3 days later, and told me I needed to be the bigger person. I've gone over that moment 1,000 times. I was sitting at my parents' kitchen table. The same one where I did homework as a kid. Where we had Thanksgiving every year. Where my dad used to help me with math problems. I couldn't figure out on my own, and he sat across from me, folded his hands the way he does, when he's about to say something he's already decided, and said, "Gideon, you two are like brothers. Don't throw that away over something you can't change." Over something you can't change. That's when I understood that nobody in that room was going to be on my side. Not my father, not my mother, not my aunt who drove 40 minutes to be there. Not a single person sitting in that living room was going to say the words I needed to hear. And I stopped waiting for them that afternoon. I stopped a lot of things that afternoon. My name is Gideon, and I'm 34 years old. I owned half of a commercial flooring company called Steadfast Interiors, based out of Nashville, Tennessee. We did mostly mid-size commercial contracts. Office buildings, retail spaces, the occasional restaurant renovation. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was solid, steady. And for 7 years it was mine in a way that very few things in my life had ever been. The other half belonged to my best friend since college. I'm going to call him my former partner here, because that's what he is now. What he was. I'm not going to use his name. He doesn't deserve a name in this story. I met my wife, Cora, 6 years ago, through a mutual friend at a birthday party in East Nashville. She was a nurse practitioner. Funny in a quiet way that sneaks up on you, and she had this habit of tilting her head slightly when she was really listening to you. I fell for that habit before I fell for anything else. We got married in the fall of 2021. Small ceremony, backyard, exactly what both of us wanted. My former partner was my best man. He gave a speech that made people cry. I remember thinking, standing there at the altar, that I was the luckiest man I knew. I run the numbers on that thought now, and it doesn't add up. The thing about building a business with someone you trust completely is that you stop looking for the things that should alarm you. When my former partner started staying late at the office, on nights I left early, I assumed he was handling bids. When I noticed he and Cora had started texting more, I'd catch a glimpse of his name on her screen. I assumed they were planning something for my birthday, which was coming up. I filled in the blanks with the most comfortable explanation every single time. That's what trust does to you. It makes you a terrible detective. I'm a flooring contractor. I'm not trained to look for fraud. But I did take one continuing education course, a couple years back, on contract disputes and documentation practices. And the instructor said something that stuck with me. The cleanest lies are the ones that use your trust as camouflage. You stop being able to see what's right in front of you. Because you've already decided the person is safe. That line came back to me in February, on a Tuesday night. I came home earlier than expected. Cora and I had been planning to meet some of our neighbors for dinner. But they canceled last minute, and I'd left the restaurant supply store I was visiting about 40 minutes ahead of schedule. I remember I picked up Indian food on the way home. Because I figured we'd just eat in, maybe watch something. Nothing dramatic about it. Just a regular Tuesday. The truck in my driveway wasn't something I registered right away. I knew the truck. I'd ridden in that truck probably 300 times. Your brain doesn't flag the familiar as a threat. I went in through the garage. I put the food on the counter. And then I heard sounds coming from the back of the house that I am not going to describe. Because they don't need to be described, and because even now they are something I'd rather not spend time on. I stood in the hallway, outside our bedroom door, for probably 15 seconds. It felt much longer. I wasn't frozen. I want to be clear about that. I was making a decision, and the decision I made was to not open that door. Instead, I went back to the kitchen. I set the food suit on the counter. I got my phone out of my pocket. I opened the Notes app, and I started writing down the time, the date, and a description of what I had heard. I took a photo of the truck in the driveway with a timestamp on. I went back to my truck, drove around the block, and parked where I could see the front of the house. 22 minutes later, he walked out the front door. He stopped on the porch, looked at his phone and left. I went back inside. Cora was in the kitchen when I walked in wearing different clothes than she'd been wearing when I kissed her goodbye that morning. She said she'd been napping. She asked if I'd picked up dinner. I said yes. I put the food on plates. We sat down and ate, and I asked her about her day and she told me. And I told her about mine, and I did not say a word about what I had seen or heard or documented. I smiled at the right moments. I poured us both water. And the whole time I was thinking about what I needed to do next, and in what order. I want to be honest about something here. I am not a naturally cold person. I'm not built for strategy in moments of pain. What I am is someone who learned early that reacting too fast costs you more than you can afford. My father taught me that actually. Back when I was 17, and I got into a fight at school that nearly got me expelled. He sat across from me, at that same kitchen table. and said, "The person who loses their head first loses everything else second." It's one of the only pieces of advice from him I've carried into adulthood. The irony of that did not escape me later. Over the next 2 weeks, I documented everything I could without tipping anyone off. I reviewed our shared business accounts carefully. I found several anomalies I had previously overlooked or explained away. Charges billed to company accounts that didn't match any of our contracts. 2 vendor invoices that, when I pulled the actual vendor records, didn't correspond to any purchase order in our systems. I'm not an accountant, but I know our books. 7 years of knowing those books told me something was wrong beyond just the personal. I contacted a CPA I'd used for a one-time audit 3 years prior. I told her I thought there were some irregularities and asked her to take a look. I also called a family law attorney. That consultation was 45 minutes. And it cost me $350. And it was the best money I spent in that entire period. Because she walked me through exactly what my exposure looked like, what I was entitled to, and what I needed to have in hand before I made any move at all. I did not tell Cora. I did not tell my former partner. I went to work every day. I sat across the conference table from him in client meetings. I reviewed bids with him. I went to lunch with him twice. I watched him laugh and talk, and act like everything was normal, and I matched him, beat for beat, because at that point I was not trying to confront anyone. I was trying to understand the full scope of what had been done to me. The CPA came back to me after 10 days. She'd found approximately $38,000 in irregularities. Money that appeared to have been routed through a vendor account we used infrequently, skimmed in small enough increments over about 14 months that it hadn't triggered any of the automatic flags we had on larger transactions. I sat with that number for a long time. $38,000. On top of everything else, on top of my wife, on top of my marriage, on top of 7 years. I called my attorney back. We talked for an hour. Then I called my CPA again. Then I spent a weekend organizing every document I had into a folder structure that any accountant or attorney, or, if it came to that, any judge could read without any help from me. I moved on a Friday. I want to walk through what that day looked like, because I think it matters. First thing in the morning, I transferred my personal savings out of the joint account Cora. And I shared for household expenses. I had checked with my attorney on this. What I moved was only the portion I had contributed over the prior year. Well within what she confirmed was legally defensible under Tennessee law. I was not trying to drain anything. I was trying to not be left with nothing. Before I left for work, I made copies of every shared document in our home that I might need. Mortgage statements, insurance documents, anything in both our names. I put them in my truck. At work I met with our office manager privately first thing in the morning. She's been with us for 4 years. She's good at her job and she deserved to know what was happening before the chaos hit. I told her there was going to be a significant change in the business structure, and that her job was not in jeopardy, but that things were about to move quickly. She didn't ask a lot of questions. She just nodded and said, "Okay, what do you need from me?" At 10 a.m., I sent an email to every active client contact we had. 18 companies total, informing them that I was dissolving my partnership with my co-owner, effective immediately, that Steadfast Interiors would be restructuring, and that their contracts and project timelines would be honored through the completion of their current work. I provided my direct contact information and the CPA's name as a reference for anyone who wanted documentation. At 10:15, I filed the paperwork to formally initiate a business dissolution with our registered agent. Tennessee law requires both partners to consent to voluntary dissolution. But my attorney had prepared for this. Because of the documented financial irregularities, I had grounds to pursue a forced dissolution. And I had the documentation to back it up. She had already sent a certified letter to my former partner's address, informing him of the fraud claim and the proceedings. At 10:30, I drove to the house and loaded my personal belongings into my truck and a rented cargo trailer I'd reserved the week before. I took my tools, my personal files, my grandmother's cast iron pan, and the half of the furniture I could demonstrate I'd purchased before the marriage. I left the rest. I left the house key on the counter. I left a note with my attorney's contact information, in case Cora needed to reach me about anything related to the divorce. I did not leave a personal note. There was nothing personal left to say. My brother had offered to let me stay in his guest room in Memphis while I figured out next steps. He's 5 years older than me, and he's a pretty quiet guy. Not much for big conversations. But he showed up with his truck that Friday afternoon and helped me load and unload, without asking me anything I didn't want to answer. At one point he just put his hand on my shoulder for a second, and then went back to carrying boxes. That was enough. I told my parents that weekend. I drove out to their place in Franklin on Saturday afternoon, and I sat them down and I explained what had happened. Not the emotional version. I didn't have that version available at the time, just the facts, the timeline. What I'd found. What I was doing about it. My father's first question was how certain I was. I told him I had 14 months of financial records, a CPA's report, time-stamped photographs, and a family law attorney actively processing my divorce. He nodded slowly, and then he said he thought it would be worth talking to both of them before things went any further. He said. And I remember this word for word. People make mistakes, Gideon. That's not the same thing as who they are. I looked at my mother. She was looking at the table. I asked her if she had anything to say. She said she thought my father was right, that we should all sit down together. She said she had always liked Cora. She said she'd always thought of my former partner as a second son. I stood up. I picked up my jacket. I told them that I'd let them know when I had a new permanent address, and that I would be in touch. My father said, "Don't do something you'll regret." I thought about that on the drive back to Memphis. I genuinely tried to find the regret. I looked for it. It wasn't there. The following weeks were not clean or easy. Divorce proceedings and business dissolution don't happen on a timetable that feels human. There were a lot of emails, a lot of document requests, a lot of waiting. My former partner's attorney sent some aggressive correspondence early on, trying to dispute the fraud characterization and suggest the financial irregularities were accounting errors. That argument did not survive contact with the actual documentation. By week 6, they'd stopped pushing that angle. The divorce was more painful than the business dissolution, in ways I didn't predict. Not because I still loved Cora by that point. I think I was well past that by the time I sat across from her, at a conference table with our attorneys, looking at asset division paperwork. It was painful because of the ordinary things. The furniture we'd picked out together, the vacation photos that came up in shared cloud storage that I had to go through and download or delete. The way I'd planned my whole life around an assumption that turned out to be wrong. I moved to Asheville, North Carolina in May. I'd always liked it there. I had a contractor friend in Asheville who offered me sub work while I got my own license reinstated in a new state, and I took it. I rented a 1-bedroom in a building near the River Arts District. I bought myself a decent couch, a new set of sheets, a cast iron skillet to replace the one I'd taken from my parents' house years ago, that had somehow ended up staying with Cora. Small things, the kind of things that start to mean something when everything larger has collapsed. I got a dog, a 4-year-old shepherd mix named Pinto, who had been sitting in a shelter in Buncombe County for 7 months. Because he was too shy to get adopted. He's not shy anymore. He sleeps at the foot of my bed and he knows exactly when I'm having a bad day, which happens less and less now. I didn't talk to my parents for almost 5 months. Not out of anger, exactly, or not only out of anger. Mostly because I didn't have anything to say to them that wouldn't tear something further open, and I needed the space to close rather than tear. My brother called once a week. Sometimes we'd talk for an hour. Sometimes we'd just watch the same football game in separate states and text each other about the calls. That was enough. In October, my mother called. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking. She said she was sorry that she hadn't said the right things when I sat down with them back in March. She didn't say she had been wrong about asking me to reconcile. She's not built for that kind of directness. But she said she was sorry, and for my mother, that covers a lot of ground. I told her I heard her. I didn't rush to say it was okay, because it wasn't, fully, but I didn't close the door either. My father has not called. I'm not holding my breath, and I'm not holding a grudge. Both of those things require more energy than I have for him right now. The fraud claim settled in August. I'm not able to discuss the specific terms, but I will say that the CPA's documentation made the outcome significantly better than I would have gotten if I'd moved on emotion back in February. That's the part of this I think about sometimes. Not with satisfaction, exactly, but with something close to it. Not because of the money. Because I did it right. I held myself together long enough to do it right. Steadfast Interiors closed formally in September. I kept our tools and our client list. I'm building something new under a different name, just me and 2 guys I hired out of my sub work in Asheville. It's smaller. It's slower. Some months are tight in a way that the last few years of Steadfast weren't. But every contract that comes in has my name on it and nobody else's. And that means something I didn't know it would mean until I didn't have it. I got a voicemail in November from my former partner. I didn't recognize the number. He must have gotten a new phone. I listened to it once, standing in my kitchen on a Tuesday night. He said he'd been wanting to reach out for a long time. He said he knew he didn't deserve anything from me. He said he was sorry. I stood there for a minute after it ended. Then I deleted it. Not because I'm still angry. I've been working on not being still angry, and I think I'm mostly there. I deleted it because an apology in a voicemail, after everything, from someone who spent 14 months looking me in the eye, is not something I owe a response to. Some things you hear, and then you let them go and you keep going. That's what I did. I'm 34 years old. I have a small company and a rented apartment, and a shy, but not shy anymore dog. And a brother who watches football with me from 300 miles away. I have a CPA I trust. And an attorney I'd recommend to anyone. I have clients who have followed me from my old work because they liked how I operated, not just who I worked with. I have Pinto, who is looking at me right now from across the room, with that particular dog expression, that means it's time for a walk. He's right, it's time for a walk. Some losses are exits. I know that now. You walk through the door thinking you're losing something, and you don't find out until later, sometimes much later, that you were actually just leaving. I'm not looking back.